Okay, I'm here with Kelvin Barker, big hardcore Chelsea fan and author of Celery, representing Chelsea in the 1980s. We're going to have a bit of a chat about England's latest debacle at the Euros and see how the post-mortem is being dissected there in England. So, Kelvin, how's it going, mate? How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Apart from England, it's all good.
Well, thanks for coming on and to discuss this with me. Just two quick observations just to get started off. Firstly, mate, your boys took one hell of a beating.
Yeah, they certainly did.
And I just also want to say, like, generally speaking, I thought England were poor at this tournament, technically and physically inadequate. Very fortunate to face a half-hour Slovakia in the final group game.
Yeah.
Do you know what that was? That second one?
The,
Do you know what either of those gags were?
No.
No.
I've got the first one. I've got the
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
Boys took a hell of a beating.
Yeah, you know that famous
Remember that one?
Norwegian commentator. Yeah, well, the second one was basically this top tactical writer, Michael Cox. He was chatting shit about Ireland after their
Oh,
after
right.
well, chatting shit. I'm being funny. He wasn't, he was just giving his opinion. But so straight after,
Oh, no.
I wrote a tweet exactly what he had written. I skewed it into. I just construed it in terms of England because his tweet went quite viral amongst Irish people. You know, the fact that as soon as the final whistle had blown on the France game, he had this really, hard-hitting tweet. When at the time people were quite proud of how Ireland performed, and he was quite cutting. And then obviously the next day England go out to Iceland, so he got a bit of stick from the Ireland fans then 24 hours later. So
It seems fair enough.
yeah, but actually his tweet, could have very well fitted in to England's tournament.
Yeah.
Right, there's so much to talk about, but taking Iceland as an isolated game, I mean, or should we take it as an isolated game? Do you think there were warning signs? I read Stephen Gerrard today saying he felt there were warning signs, having failed to beat Russia or Slovakia and only barely beating Wales, that he could see
Yeah.
kind of storm clouds on the horizon. So
Oh, absolutely. I don't think England played well. I mean, going back to that tweet, I don't think any England fan should think for 1 second that they can mock any of the other teams who are in the competition, let alone Ireland, who are yet again overachieving for the quality of play. And I don't mean that to be derogatory.
But just to be clear as well, but just to be clear as well, he definitely wasn't mocking. It was just way over the top. Obviously, he was doing it in a professional tactical context, but it was just it was over the top, really. But yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I mean, and the bottom line from England, I agree with what Stephen Gerrard said in that case. I think the warning signs were there. I have to be honest, I didn't see the Russia game, but from what I gathered, that was actually a decent performance by England. But
it was the best of the four, without question.
yeah, well, fair enough.
It was all downhill from there, from Eric Dyer's goal. It was all downhill from there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, the Wales game that we won, I think. I don't think we can say we played well. That the game was too big for Wales. The occasion was too big for Wales.
Yeah.
They sat back. They didn't do anything that day, and we nicked it. So that alone, I think, wasn't a good sign.
Yeah.
The Slovakia thing and 80% of the play or whatever it was that Hodgson was trying to claim, we created nothing against the poor team. Germany destroyed them. They had them beaten within about 20 minutes. We created nothing. So it's been a poor tournament for England. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah,
and I think some of the... Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, no, just and the thing about Iceland is that there's something very, it's the fact that it was such a small minnow and that England went out in the way that they did, and some of the details that have come out since that. For example, Roy Hodgson didn't even go to watch Iceland's final group game. He went sightseeing around Paris instead. And just it was symbolic of the hubris that we've seen. Going back to the fact that England only entered their first World Cup in 1950 because basically for the first 20 years they just thought there was no point because they were the best team, and then they got completely humbled by the USA in 1950. And it's the same deluded sense of grandeur is still there. Not to the same extent. It's come down over the last 10, 15 years. You don't hear in Ireland we used to scoff at how this is going to be England's tournament all through the late 90s, because there was, if you look back at Euro 96 and France 98, there was very much good reason to believe, because there was a great group of men and players, you like Gazas, Beckhams, Paul Ince. When you look back, like that was a really good era for English football. You know, we look at what we're seeing today, and how it's really gone backwards so much. And then other things like, say, Steve McLaren on. Have you seen that funny video of him?
No, I've still not watched it.
No.
I've not seen it yet.
But just that encapsulated very well, because he's an ex-England manager who he's the Wally and the Brawley who completely flopped, and that he even was in his commentary. He was just like, "Oh, they've only got one player, and England are totally dominating." You know, he didn't even know any of the Iceland players, and you know, he was saying they've only got one guy. He couldn't even say his name, Sigurdsson, and he's Sigthorsson, I think that's how you pronounce it. And,
is that what
it's hilarious. You have to go and watch it, but. So
I've got clicked on the link. I've seen it.
Yeah, just the whole thing about going out to Iceland in the way that England did. It was just for me. I'm just trying to put a point across that there was so much hubris and.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to believe, and I might just be completely naive.
Just basically thinking they could turn up and that Iceland would just roll over for them. And when Iceland didn't roll over, there was no. They didn't know what to do.
Well, no, I mean, Iceland did the double over Holland in the qualifying, and obviously got a point against Portugal in the group stages, which is one more point than England would have got against Portugal.
Yeah.
So they should have taken them seriously. I won't deny it. I expected England to win and win quite comfortably, because I thought it would be a game too far for Iceland as well, and I thought that the pressure would get to them, and obviously it didn't. But I would like to think that 50 years of hurt, as they call it now, has taught England to not be arrogant. And with a manager like Hodgson, for all his many faults that have now become apparent, he doesn't strike me as a cocky type. And I would have liked,
that's fair enough.
You know, I kind of thought England would have taken this game seriously, and I do actually wonder if there's competence at fault here. Really, I'm just not sure that we've got the right players, that we've got a good enough squad of players. I mean, that England team is overly reliant all of a sudden on half of the Spurs team that imploded in the last month of the season, lost 5-1 to a 10-man relegated team in Newcastle, showed that they couldn't handle the pressure in the last month of the season. And that's the bulk of this England team that's gone into this tournament, and everyone's had to put their faith in them. But
captain by a washed out, you know, just burned out Wayne Rooney. I mean, it was tragic to see him against Iceland. And, you know, a couple of decent passes against Slovakia, and people are describing him as, you know, a kind of midfield quarterback and making comparisons with Modric and players like that. But he's just
ridiculous.
He's really had his day at England now. I mean, he's got great caps. He's got the goals record as well. But I just think when I look at him, there are a few things actually I want to say about him, because he seems to kind of treat it now like it's almost like a civil service kind of desk job. You know, he looks really insipid in his body language. Even, you know, when he used to be that raging bull in his early days. You know, remember there was a famous time when Beckham had to calm him down. I think it was against Northern Ireland. He was off his rocker, totally full on. You know, just that young testosterone, and he just looks so sort of like just insipid now. And even after when I think it was Gabby Logan, perhaps it was the ITV reporter who was asking him if it was his worst ever defeat, and there was a little kind of chuckle about it, and obviously he doesn't find it funny, but he definitely wasn't hurting. You know, what I mean to say is that him and a lot of them, they look like they could take England or leave it. You know, maybe it's like a metaphor for Brexit or something. I don't know, but when you look at the Wales, the other home nations, Ireland, you know, the Ireland are really hurting to go out to France, and
I honestly don't think there's any doubt that these massively overpaid, overinflated egos that make up.
Yeah, that's what happened to Rooney. He got too much money, and it's totally ruined him. It's totally ruined him. Yeah.
But what comes with that then is that every time he can't trap a ball like he couldn't on Monday night, you know, and it kept going under his foot, everybody thinks to themselves, you pay £300,000 a week to this man, and he can't even trap a football anymore. But to be honest, his malaise seemed to be setting at club level as well, because I don't think he did anything really last season for United.
I mean, the real truth is he shot it, you know, 2 years ago, really, as Brian Clough used to famously say. I mean, that's the real truth, and I think he's kind of like almost like a Gordian knot at the club now. It's like they can't get rid of him. They've got him on this wage. He's the status symbol of the captain, but footballing wise, he's clearly not at the level anymore.
No, I agree with you. But also, I think making him captain of his country, I think he's had to tone down his behaviour. And the amount of times commentators said about how important Rooney is to the younger players, but then when you take that fire out of Rooney, which is naturally there, and you see it with people like Costa these days, and if I go back to my old Chelsea days, people like David Speedy, there was something in there with these guys. Dennis Wise is another one.
Oh, yeah.
They needed to be on the edge to be that as good as they were, and I think they've taken that away from Rooney as well by giving him this responsibility.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, it's the way there's the cliche about you can't take that out of his game, or people like Costa, if you took out the nastiness, you wouldn't have the same player. And then people kind of tend to mock at that and say, sure, you can't stop him kicking a guy. But actually, I think it's true. I think you do need that angry Rooney was the best Rooney. When you think of Rooney's best years, he was an angry, aggressive young man. Like there was Rio Ferdinand said, he used to smash phones all the time, and he was burning full of rage. And now he just looks too comfortable and content. He's just over the hill. I think it's the same thing happened to Michael Owen, not the rage, but I mean the early young burst of enthusiasm and energy. We see Marcus Rashford now as the young guys. They really peak at that when we see them and we think they're going to get to their best 28, 29. Actually, those really young, fast, enthusiastic kids they're often seeing their best years in their early 20s.
Yeah. And they're washed up like Owen was when he got to that age. Yeah.
Well, what do you think? What do you think about the winter break theory that's doing the rounds now? I mean, to me it's obviously a bit ridiculous because Rooney, if you gave him 3 weeks off at Christmas, does that mean he would have been able to trap those balls the other night? For me, it was more about a general fear came over England in that second half, and just they panicked, like Steven Gerrard said. I don't think it was a physical fatigue. But having said that, some people like Harry Kane looked overweight and really out of shape at this Euros. Like he's really I consider him like a slim, athletic type. His face was all flush the whole time at this Euros. Yeah. He looked really out of sorts. So I think that there was a bit of fatigue with him. I would say with Harry Kane.
I think there's talk. Don't they say that Pochettino, his teams tend to flag in the sort of last third of the season? People have said this to me before about he overtrains them and they tend to trail off towards the end of the season.
Yeah, there is that.
But then you look at Kyle Walker, and he was. I mean, I don't particularly rate Kyle Walker, but he was full of energy from start to finish. But
him and Danny Rose come out of the Euros, I think, with their reputations intact.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about Danny Rose, to be honest. I'm not sure that he's an international footballer, but I don't think he embarrassed himself.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean intact. I mean, I think they. It's more the attacking players. I think that. Okay, they conceded 2 against Iceland, but I think from that point on, the midfield and attack, the onus was on them to go and get a goal, and they couldn't do it.
No, that's right. And England have got problems at the centre of defence as well, haven't they? So you you can't really point too much at Walker and Rose when you've got Cahill and Smalling in the middle there. They're just not good enough to be international.
Yeah, they're average. They're average level players. They wouldn't have got anywhere near the 98 or the 2000 team.
No.
When you had it was obviously Campbell and Rio at the back, John Terry, Jamie Carragher couldn't get into the team.
Well,
he'd be the first name on the team sheet right now. So it goes back to your original point that the talent isn't what is presumed because it's the Premier League. These are Premier League players, but the level has gone down. We look at Leicester winning the league. We look at how even the year before, the year Chelsea won it was by no means a vintage year. So there's a general dropping off the talent, isn't it? Yeah. What other players was I going to mention? Well, Joe Hart actually there was a really excoriating article about him in the Independent today. I don't know if you read it.
No.
Ian Herbert, I think, really lashing into Joe Hart, just describing him as this really obnoxious and arrogant guy who won't answer questions in interviews. For example, the mascot that players were carrying around, like Kit the lion, and like just a little banter question like that, Joe Hart wouldn't answer. Oh no, it was a question about a darts tournament that he was organising, and while that reflects bad on Hart, I think it also shows the fear that the players have about being stitched up by the media. And
well, yeah. I mean, that's what I was thinking, Paul. You know, I don't think there's many people in the media who can feel too sorry for themselves if the players don't respond to them, because every tournament, the English media go out of their way to stir something up beforehand. So the fact that they've probably not been able to do it this time because the players are being a bit cautious. I mean, to defend Joe Hart, you can't defend his performances in the tournament, but he always strikes me as actually somebody who
cares.
Every game for City makes himself available to the press, and every time City have lost is brutally honest. I actually quite admire him in some of his interviews, because he says things that his manager was wishing he wasn't saying. So I
think he'd be a better captain, personally speaking.
Yeah.
I don't think he's good enough goalkeeper, but as a lad,
No.
I think he's a good guy, and I just think when I saw Rooney's post-match interview, you should look it up. I tweeted it on the night, because there's the smile. Look, I know he didn't actually find it humorous, but. And I know this might sound like Roy Keane, but you really shouldn't be able to even muster a smile after you've gone out to Iceland. It should be just sheer shell shock. He looked they looked really resigned to it, and almost like the last 10 minutes was okay. There was a few little half chances coming in, but there was also, I know it might sound exaggerating, but kind of almost waiting for a flight home and just let's get back to our clubs now and get back to pre-season. We're not going to win the thing.
It's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? I mean, they are weak. They are weak mentally, I think. But at the same time, they've been rich for so long, and they've been pampered for so long, and they've never had to fight for anything in their lives, these guys. And I sort of can't work out how they're ever going to get the hunger.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's one point, another area I wanted to bring up was that another theory that has come out is that, the insular mentality you were saying about being weak, I think that can tie into the insularity and the fact that they all stay in England their whole careers. And if you look at, apart from Italy, they generally stay in Italy, but most teams, like look at the great Spain, had likes of Torres and a lot of other players like Gerard Piqué and Fabregas had gone off to England in their young years and had dovetailed, I suppose, the tiki-taka with the British spirit, whereas the English lads just spend their whole careers in England. Have you been reading much about that, or what do you feel about that yourself?
I think from a personal point of view, I would say that not many of the current England team would get very far in a foreign league or in a top foreign league. I don't think they do particularly well in Germany, Spain or Italy, because I don't think they'd be in demand particularly. But I also think that the problem is they can probably earn more in the Premier League.
Well, this is it. This is conundrum is the word you used just before, and like back in the 90s, sure, like the likes of Gaza went to Lazio and Ince went to Inter Milan, but the fact is now that fucking like Everton player or I'm trying to think like level who finished 6th or 7th last year.
Southampton or
maybe Southampton, Swansea for example, like got got Andrew Ayew to leave Marseille, one of France's biggest clubs, to come to a mid-table English club. You can earn more at Swansea or at Newcastle. John Joe Shelby went to Newcastle, earning huge money. Andros Townsend. Then you can at anyone outside the top 3 in Spain. So there really aren't the opportunities, even though they don't want to go away. But it's not. The money speaks, and money. They can earn so much more money in England. They're not. Someone like Dele Alli, for example, could greatly benefit from going to somewhere like Athletic Bilbao, or they only sign bass players. Very bad example. A mid-table Spanish club. He just
I think he'd probably find he's not quite so good if he was in Spain. Actually, I think you might find that Dele Alli isn't quite the player.
He was really poor, and I've really loved him. I've really been impressed over his breakout season in the Premier League. But you know what he's great at is the cut and thrust of the back and forth in the Premier League, getting into the box on the end of things, like Frank Lampard did in his heyday. But when it came to the more intricate stuff in this Euros, he was so lost and he was sloppy in the middle third of play. He basically wants to. He kind of wants to be like an attacking midfielder, like Steven Gerrard. Well, Steven Gerrard's his idol. He's probably the better comparison, but there aren't always those opportunities in international football. You've got close, tight games like teams like Iceland who are going to close back. So I agree with you. He was kind of found out in some ways. He's got a huge future. He's like 20 years of age, but I just think there needs to be a calmness around the hype around him.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people need to realise as well that I'm quite cynical about it at the moment. I think excelling in the Premier League over the last 4 or 5 years actually means nothing. I don't think you can look a good defender in the Premier League because it's not that strong. And Chris Smalling is a good example of that. People raved about him all season, despite the many mistakes he's made. But because he's in a weak league, people have said he's excelled. And you can look at Kane, and you can look at the goals that Sturridge scores, and Dele Alli generally, and all these guys. They're playing in such a weak league, and it's so weak that Leicester can win it. But like you say, the season we ran away with it. That was a team that wasn't a patch on Mourinho's two teams that won the title for Chelsea. But we ran away with the league because there was nobody else competing.
Yeah.
United won it when they only really had Van Persie performing, but it was almost a one-man team, but they won the league. Man City won it when Liverpool blew up. Liverpool shouldn't have been anywhere near the title.
Yeah, but I mean, the real elite, the real top days of the early 2000s, early 90s, late 90s, it's definitely regressed from then. And then, that ties into, like, have you heard Chris Waddle's rants about when you mentioned Chris Smalling there? I just had a snapshot of his when I see him on the pitch, and he's another guy who's quite insipid to me, and as personalities, there's lacking in real men in there, like your Paul Inces and players like that. And what did he call them? Like they're walking headphones. Like they're all on their Instagram. Yes. Like there was a picture of Rooney scrolling through his phone as he walked out. They're all on the phones. They're all building their brands. I won't say them all. I mean, what I mean is there's a general culture of Instagramming and social media and personal brands. Rooney being the real epitome of that, over just hard work and passion for football, like you see in. Yeah. You see, the great Spain teams, are really give the lie to a lot of the myths about English football, like pressure with the media. There's huge pressure in the Spanish media, and the club football is obviously huge. The core groups of players come from Madrid and Barcelona, who have this internecine civil war every year. But they put that to one side because they love football. Like the likes of Xavi and Iniesta, first and foremost, love passing the ball to each other. That's what they just love doing at training all day. And I just get the feeling that a lot of guys are picking up checks in England now, and they're losing interest in
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I couldn't argue with that at all, to be honest. I think there is a lot of that, and I just don't understand how guys who are now coming through in England, who are millionaires by the age of 17.
Well, yeah.
I don't understand how they're supposed to keep that hunger. They certainly don't get the passion, and maybe us as fans are a bit guilty of it as well, because they're club over country just the same as we are now. But I don't know. It's not going to change anytime soon, that's for sure. And it probably I don't expect to ever see England win a trophy in my lifetime. And in fact, they did win one in my lifetime, but I was too young to remember it, and I don't think it will happen while I'm still on this planet. I just think miles behind.
Well, yeah, I mean, just look into the future now, just as we're going to wrap it up, because when you say that, I've been doing a bit of reading today, and you might be aware of this, that there's a ticking clock in St. George's Park, counting down to when England are going to win it in Qatar in 2022. Have you heard that?
A big battery in it.
Yeah, have you heard that? Unbelievable.
It's crazy. You talk about statistics, Paul. I read this statistic this week that I had no idea about, and completely amazed me, that England have won 6 knockout games in the last 50 years. That's just berserk. I mean, that's absolutely.
Do you know what the last one was? Ecuador in 2006.
Yeah.
That's frightening.
Yeah. I mean, that's a stat that really people should have started registering with that 20, 30 years ago, that we had an issue here, and not waited till now before suddenly it's become a big deal. Because even 20 years ago, the fact that we'd probably at that point won 3 or 4 knockout games in 30 years, that is outrageous, really.
So I'm about to ask you a question, which I think, just to wrap it up looking into the future, which I think personally is just a total misnomer and non-starter, i.e. who should be the new manager. And it's not just a managerial issue. It goes so much deeper. It goes to all the cultural stuff we've just been talking about, and the cultural style of play, the cultural personalities of these players, the celebrity status that they have, and no one manager is just going to have a magic wand. People say, bring in a Mourinho or a Wenger, and I mean, really, what is he going to get them to play a whole lot better? I just think this generation is almost going to be a write-off, and there's going to have to be a whole new way of teaching kids from a young age, teaching them to be more, more mature and more like when you look at the German players, because I don't think it's an academy problem, because the Iceland football revolution and German one was an academy one. Because there's this theory about you need to take them out of the academies, are too mollycoddled. I think you need to get them off their phones and get them playing ball in the street more.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about kids. I know it's like something grand to say. I'm talking about the actual current players need to just get back to basics of.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you, but I just don't see how it's going to change. The money's still there. The TV companies are still pumping in more and more and more money. And while the clubs have got the money, the agents and the players have got them over a barrel. I just don't see where it changes. And in that respect, because I don't think there can be any change in, I think anybody who plays for England for the next God knows how many years is already going to be fabulously wealthy. So you have to find other ways to make them hungry. And I do actually think that the way to do it now, the only way we've got any hope, is to get in a manager who has earned that respect by his trophies, by having been there, seen it and done it.
Okay,
and I don't think somebody like Gareth Southgate, for instance, Gareth Southgate had an okay career. He wasn't a bad club level player. He was an average international footballer. He's got a poor early career in club management. Doing it for the under-21s to me means nothing at the top level.
Okay.
And any of those English managers who are being mentioned have achieved little or nothing really.
Is it true that Glenn Hoddle is the early front-runner favourite? That's just incredible. He hasn't done any, he's just been a TV punter for the last 10 years, basically, yeah?
Yeah, and one who's becoming older and older and more rambling and talking more and more rubbish than he ever has done. And I
presume he's still Buddhist as well, so that's going to be an issue, right? If he still believes in... Wasn't that the whole problem of him getting sacked?
Exactly, yeah. He got sacked for it once for his strange beliefs, didn't he? So, no, I actually think that England would benefit from getting in somebody who the players can't say, well, show me your medals, because I think they need to have someone they can look up to. Mourinho kind of feels like the obvious one, but he's not stupid enough to take that job anyway. And Wenger wouldn't either, he's too intelligent for that. But I think that they do need to look abroad now. I don't think there's an English manager out there who's capable of taking on this job, and I think it needs to be an experienced.
I've seen Jurgen Klinsmann mentioned.
Yeah, and I like that. Carragher, I think Carragher sort of seemed to bring him to the fore, and I tend to agree with that actually, because he's been there, seen it, and done it at every level, player and manager now. Mm-hmm. Of those that have been mentioned, actually, I tend to agree that he's probably the best.
Okay,
and he's intelligent.
All right, so say just the last question here. So, looking into post Euros, once all this has died down and England go for the next qualifying, I think the next game is against Slovakia in September.
Yeah.
What would be your 11? Like, how different would you be your ideal 11 from the one that finished against Iceland? Ooh. Ideally speaking, all right, because it's just. For me, Rooney would no longer be an England international, for the good of the team. But it will just never happen. I just think he's too embedded in the culture of it now, and he's, you know what I mean. So give me your, in an ideal world, which players would you no longer have in there, and which one?
No longer have.
Even as unrealistic as it would seem, speaking very hypothetically.
Well, I would, even if they can't, I can't think of the right players to replace them. But certainly, as soon as possible, I would say that England need to lose Cahill and Smalling, and get
John
a couple
Stones.
of decent.
John Stones in, yeah.
It needs to be somebody he's the obvious one if he can get his head straight again. But not average players like Cahill and Smalling, because we're never going to get anywhere with players like that. I tend to think Danny Rose similar, but not quite so bad. I might be being a bit harsh on him, and it's probably because he plays for Spurs. I agree with you that Rooney should be gone now. If he's not a striker, England shouldn't be playing him out of position anyway. And no, he's finished. I think that the front men like Kane, Vardy, and Sturridge have all got something to offer, but need to be played in position and not all just be squeezed into the team. And Rashford as well, for that matter, needs to be brought through. But he's got to play them in their right positions. And if he can only put one or two in, then the others have to come off the bench.
Yeah.
I think Dyer has come through okay and is worth persisting with. I think he's got something about him. But really, other than
Ross Barkley, I can't understand how Ross Barkley wasn't given a run in this Euros.
But Barkley's just not coming on. He's just not.
Yeah, but
he doesn't.
I know. But don't you think he would have at least done something? He would have tried something. I think he's got a bit of the street baller about him, and he's got a bit of initiative. Rooney's lost all of his initiative.
No, I take your point. I do take your point. And in fairness,
I remember one game. I remember one World Cup warm-up game when he was absolutely sensational. It was 2 years ago, obviously. He's gone back since then. I know he's been a big lad as well. He's not always in the best of physical shape. But I remember this goal he set up. I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been that Ecuador game in the World. I know this is going back. It's hard to remember the exact game, but he'd nutmegged the guy and he set up a goal with an incredible piece of individual play. And then afterwards, Hodgson was like criticising him. So I think you need to just let kids like him go out and look what Rashford did when he came out and expressed himself. So you're not a big Barkley fan. So who would you bring in then? Like, obviously, I mean, you could take Rooney out and just play Dyer there. Sorry, not Dyer, Dele Alli there.
Dele Alli's worth persisting with, but this is where it's becoming difficult because, even the players that were a bit unlucky to miss out. And the one that comes to mind is Andros Townsend.
Danny Drinkwater, of course.
But they're not. Oh yeah, Drinkwater. Yeah. And to an extent, Andy Carroll. Although I don't think Andy Carroll should ever play international football because I don't think he'd get away with what he can get away with in the Premier League. But none of them are the sort of guys. They were on the periphery of the squad, but they don't. To me, they're not England's future. We need to have a better future than any of those sort of players. And I'm not sure. This is the problem. I'm not sure who we would bring in. Drinkwater would probably warrant a bit of a run. This
has been an interesting little exercise to finish off because it backs up I think the point you've been kind of really reiterating throughout this discussion is that the talent pool just is nowhere near what people think it is, and it's nowhere near what it used to be. Look back in the late 90s, people like Andy Cole and Robbie Fowler couldn't get into the squad sometimes, it's crazy.
Exactly.
I think how
and even they were unsuccessful England teams. They didn't really achieve what they should have, but you compare that sort of pool of players like you just said there to the ones that we've got now, there is no comparison. We're falling behind rapidly. It wouldn't hurt actually for people to stop talking about the Premier League as the best league in the world because it patently isn't. And all the while people are buying into it, that they're becoming more and more deluded. We're a long way behind the top leagues, and we're a long way behind the top international teams, as we've seen. The last couple of weeks.
All right, man, Kelvin, it's been a really fun discussion. I don't want to keep you any longer. I said 15. This has gone to 40 minutes. I'm very sorry to have kept you so long. Really appreciate you coming on. So Kelvin can be got at Chelsea Kelv. Go and follow him. He's a massive long-term Chelsea fan who has also written a book called Celery, represented Chelsea in the 1980s, and he's a real authority on all things Chelsea and Premier League in general. So go and make sure to follow Kelvin. All right, mate. I'm going to let you go now, right?
Great stuff.
Thanks so
Cheers,
much.
have a good night.
Yeah, mate, you too. Bye-bye.